Would you like to get more out of your layering stencils? Well, stick around because I've got 2 easy ideas to share with you. If you are not confident at colouring, then layering stencils are perfect for you. And in fact, if you're short on time, they're also perfect for you. I'm going to be using these Romantic Roses, which is a layering stencil set, to create a couple of cards today and share with you 2 ideas that you can use to step up your stencils. I'm going to start with my first technique, which is to miss a layer. Now, what I'm doing here first though is creating the image as it was intended, using all of the layers, because this is really going to help me get an idea of how the layering stencil set works together. And it will give me a second rose to use for my next card, which I'm going to share the second technique on. So you can play around with this idea, but typically the layer of the image that I miss is the very first one. So it's usually like the base layer of the flower, which is often coloured in the lightest colour. And what that means is if I'm colouring on white cardstock, then that missed layer is going to end up white, which will look like a fantastic highlight on your image. And in fact, on this rose it does. It looks amazing. So on my initial flower, I've done both layers already. But then on the second image, I've literally started with the second layer of stencil and I'm using the same colours. I find that makes it easier until you get confident with an image. Once you've used it a few times, you'll know exactly where you're at with it. But a good rule of thumb is to start by missing the first layer of the stencil, and that is going to give you that highlight that I was talking about. Now I've done the same thing on the leaves here. So on my initial image, I have coloured the whole base of the leaf, and on the second flower of the rose, I've only used the second layer because these are a 3-layer set. I've only used the second layer of the leaf and the third. So depending on the actual image itself, sometimes it looks better if you do all of the layers of the leaves and then only miss the stencil layer on the flower. And if you don't have the coordinating die, simply lay the initial stencil over top and draw a faint pencil line, and that's going to give you a sort of a guide as to where you can fussy cut it out instead. And I've got a simple trick to share with you here. If you don't have many ink colours, you can actually use the same colour for 2 different layers of the image. I use the large blending tool for these 2 layers, but if I had to come in with the mini blending tool, I find that the application of ink with that, it just is so intense. It looks amazing. It's one of my favourite blending tools to use. And I love how this darker rose turned out. And now that the ink blended roses are ready to go, we're on to the second technique. And this one is to add shading using pencils. So don't freak out. I'm going to walk you through it step by step. If you're not confident at colouring with pencils, don't worry. This is really easy to do. So I've chosen some pencils that are very similar in colours to the inks that I'm using. I like to test my pencil colours on a scrap piece of paper, and then I'll choose one that's just slightly darker than the inks that I've used. Then to add the detail or the look of shading, I'm coming in, I usually start with the darker portion of the ink blending because that gives me a guide of where the depth of the petals are in the image and where the petals would meet the base of the flower. So you can see here that I'm adding a slightly darker colour of the pencil in that area, and then it's almost like shading it out. I'm lifting the pencil a little bit lighter and blending the pencil itself, not taking it all the way to where the ink blending finished. You can do as little or as much of this as you like. You can even use multiple coloured pencils, which I do. You'll see that a little bit in the next flower. So a little bit darker by adding more pressure, and then blending the color out. Now these pencils are watercolor pencils, so they do have a slightly different look and texture on the paper. I'm not using them as watercolors here. I'm literally using them as pencils. You can use whatever pencils you have. And don't worry, I'm going to walk you through this a little bit more just to give you an idea of how you can mix a couple of colors together. And this is, you can get really bold. I'm using the jet black pencil here and pretty much just focusing it on those real edge corners of the petals and where the petals hit the base of the rose, and also on the leaves. I used a darker color on the edge of the leaf. It just gives that shadow effect. I'm using the stencil as a guide here, so I'm not having to think too hard about where the rose is. And to be honest, like, just start small, do a little area, and if you think, sit back, look at it. If you think it needs more depth and shading, that's when you come in with a second color. And I'm using the Rubelite with the jet black ink here on this darker rose, and I think that was a really good combination. It just gives a bit more definition to the flower petals and to the flower, and just helps step up what is already a beautiful stencil. Another way that you can get a similar look if you're not confident to use pencils is to have like a mini blending tool, and when you have your stencil layered on top, you can come in with a slightly darker ink and add some depth that way. I decided to make a couple of quick watercolor backgrounds for my cards, and I'm using the same inks that I used in the flowers themselves, so I know they're going to match. I've got some watercolor cardstock here, and for both the backgrounds, one's just a quick splotchy one that I painted with a watercolor brush, and the second one is a bit more intense, and I used a piece of acetate and did the smooshing technique, and then just set these aside to dry real quick. And once it was dry, I added a few splatters, because if you add the splatters while the watercolor cardstock is wet, they're just going to seep in. Now I've stamped a sentiment and just added the panel to the front of a side fold card. This image here is the one where I missed a layer of the stencil, and I think it gives it a real modern look, so I kept this very clean and simple, this card design. And I love the way that that white pops on the image. My second card design is going to be quite a bit busier because it's got the 3 roses that I'm going to put on it, and I stamped and heat embossed a sentiment, and I'm so excited. I just wanted to share with you, this new foam tape is 1 inch wide. Now it's the same thickness as Altenew's other foam tape, which is my favorite ever, but this I'm loving it because it's going to last me an age, because I can cut it sideways. Does that make sense? Vertical instead of horizontal. Anyway, I did adhere the pale pink flower directly to the card base and popped up the darker pink flower and also the sentiment. And this is quite a busy card for me, but I just love the romantic look of these roses. They are so pretty. And all together now, this is the first rose I made where I missed the very first layer of the image, and it just changes up the way that the stencils look, and I think it gives it a very modern look. And the second technique, where we used pencils and some simple shading, using the stencil itself to guide us to add some depth and detail to these beautiful roses. Let me know in the comments below if you have a favorite today, or if you're going to try this technique, and let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Till next time, bye.
Hello there, did that video just spark your creativity? And do you want more project ideas and inspiration videos too? Well, if you do, please make sure that you subscribe to the Altenew YouTube channel. Also, make sure that you do click that notification bell so you don't miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.